Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This is Dr. Ayman Salahuddin Amir, Associate Professor in the Department of Human Anatomy and Embryology. In this lecture, we are going to learn about the structure of the ear and the auditory pathway. By the end of this lecture, you will be able to describe the anatomy of the external auditory meatus and outer ear, and identify the boundaries and contents of the middle ear and parts of the inner ear. Also, you will be able to recognize the components of the auditory pathway. In addition, you will be able to correlate the different anatomical facts concerning the relation of the middle ear to the temporal lobe of cerebrum and the relation of the chorda tympani nerve to the tympanic membrane. Also, you will be able to explain the effect of injury and types of deafness on anatomical basis. The ear. The ear is made of three parts. The most lateral part is the outer ear or external ear. The external ear is made of the auricle or the ear pinna and the external acoustic meatus and the tympanic membrane. The middle ear is a cavity that has three small bones called the ear ossicles. The inner ear is the labyrinth and it's made of the cochlea and the semicircular ducts. These structures you will learn more about in the following slide. The ear as a whole is a receptor organ for hearing and equilibrium. So this whole ear is functioning for two things: hearing of sounds and equilibrium or balance in space. Anatomically, the ear is divided into three parts: the external or outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. For the functions, the outer ear and middle ear together, they have one function, which is hearing, transmission of the sounds only. The inner or internal ear, it has two functions: hearing and equilibrium. The hearing is carried by this structure, which is called the cochlea, and the equilibrium or balance in space, this is carried by the semicircular canals. Just to review rapidly the main structures of the ear. The outer ear is made of three things: the auricle, the external acoustic meatus, or the external auditory canal. It's the same thing when you name it as external auditory canal or external acoustic meatus. And lastly, the ear drum or tympanic membrane. The middle ear is a space or cavity. It has three small bones. The three small bones are the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. This middle ear is connected with the nasopharynx through this canal, which is called the auditory canal or the Eustachian tube. Canal Eustachius. The inner ear has the labyrinth, which is made of the cochlea, which is for the hearing of sounds, and the semicircular canals made for the function of equilibrium and balance in space. The cranial nerves that reach to the ear are the facial nerve and the vestibular part and auditory part of the vestibulocochlear nerve, which is the eighth cranial nerve. Now let's know about the outer or external ear in details. The external ear Here it is in this picture. You see first the auricle or pinna. This structure is important for collection of sounds into the ear. It's made of cartilage covered by skin, and it has several parts. If you look at the auricle is made of the helix, the antihelix, the tragus, and the antitragus, in addition to the lobule and the concha. These 6 parts are the parts forming the auricle or pinna. The external auditory meatus or canal, it is 1 inch long. It has 2 parts. The lateral 1/3 is made of cartilage. The medial 2/3 is made of the bone called the temporal bone. It's one of the bones of the skull, the temporal bone. The external auditory meatus is lined by skin. This skin is hairy skin. It has hairs and glands that produce the wax. Lastly, this is the tympanic membrane or eardrum, طبلة الأذن. This eardrum separates the outer ear from the middle ear. The middle ear, as I said before, it has 3 small bones, the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. The 3 bones transmit the sound vibrations that are made in the tympanic membrane, transmit that to the oval window. This is the oval window that's close by the stapes bone. The sound is transmitted from the oval window through the inner ear, the parts of the cochlea. This is the scala vestibuli, transmit the sound, and then the scala tympani. They all transmit the vibrations of the sound. Finally, it reaches to this sensed part, which is called the organ of Corti, that sense the sounds. The organ of Corti is placed on the basilar membrane. That's all for the outer ear. Now, in this slide, we are going to learn about the details of the middle ear or the tympanic cavity. This is a very important part, the middle ear or tympanic cavity, so we need to know the structures that are making this middle ear. The middle ear can be represented as a box, عاملة زي صندوق. It has 6 folds, ليها 6 جدار. The 6 walls start by the roof on top, the floor below, the anterior wall in front, and the posterior wall in the back, then the medial wall and the lateral wall lateral. In regards to the details, we are going to see what is located in each of these 6 walls. First, the anterior wall. The anterior wall is related to the internal carotid artery, and it has an opening for the pharyngeo-tympanic tube or Eustachian tube, Eustachius. On the top, there is an opening for the tensor tympani muscle. Tensor tympani muscle. This tensor tympani muscle, from its name, it's a muscle that's related to the tympanic membrane, and it tenses the tympanic membrane. Lastly, it is related as the junction between the anterior wall and the roof. The ganglion, the geniculate ganglion of the facial nerve is located there. Now let's see the roof. Here is the roof. The roof is related to a part of bone called the tegmen tympani. Tegmen tympani is a part of the petrous bone. So the whole middle ear is located in the petrous bone, and the roof is made by a specific point called the tegmen tympani. On top of that, you will see the meninges, like the pia, arachnoid, and dura. All that meninges is making the relation between the floor of the skull at the middle cranial fossa, which is the tegmen tympani, and then the structures, the meninges that cover the brain. There is a specific part of the brain related to the middle ear, which is called the temporal lobe of the cerebral hemisphere. So again, the roof is made of the tegmen tympani. On top of that, we will see the meninges and the structures in the floor of the middle cranial fossa. And lastly, you will see the temporal lobe of the cerebrum. So we have the temporal lobe of the cerebrum, the floor of the base of the skull. We have that makes the roof of the middle ear. Now let's see the facial nerve. The facial nerve, it runs in relation to the middle ear. It has a ganglion called the geniculate ganglion. This geniculate ganglion is located at the site junction of the roof of the middle ear and the anterior wall. Then the facial nerve runs around this point of junction between the roof and the medial wall, and then it relates to the junction between the medial wall and the posterior wall, and so on. So these are the dots representing the cords of the facial nerve. So far we finished the roof and the anterior wall. Now let's see the posterior wall. The posterior wall of the middle ear is related to the chorda tympani nerve. The chorda tympani or chorda tympani nerve, it's arising from the facial nerve. On top of that, there is a bony prominence called pyramid. At this pyramid, the tendon of stapedius is attached. Stapedius is the shortest muscle in the whole body, and it's attached to the pyramid, which is a small bony projection at the posterior wall of the middle ear, and then it connects that point with the stapes. The stapes is one of the bony ossicles, and it's closing the oval window. So this small piece of muscle is called the stapedius muscle. On top of that, you will see a big opening. It is the adytus, or the opening for the mastoid hair cells, and from there you can reach to the mastoid hair cells. There is a bulge located in this area made by the lateral semicircular canal. So these all structures make the posterior wall of the middle ear cavity or tympanic cavity. The floor of the middle ear is related to a very important structure, which is the internal jugular vein, and there is a bulge of the internal jugular vein at this point of the floor of the middle ear. Now let's see the lateral wall. Here is the lateral wall. The lateral wall has a relation with the chorda tympani nerve. The chorda tympani nerve runs on the inner side of the lateral wall. The lateral wall is made by the tympanic membrane or eardrum. This eardrum has relation to the cords of the chorda tympani nerve from the posterior point to the anterior point of the lateral wall. Also, you'll see the malleus. The malleus is one of the bony ossicles. The malleus is related to the inner side of the tympanic membrane that makes the lateral wall of the middle ear. Lastly, we'll see the medial wall. The medial wall has a relation to the lateral semicircular canal, and also there is a big bony prominence called promontory. The promontory is located between two openings. The lower opening is called the round window, and this round window is closed by the secondary tympanic membrane, On top of the promontory, this is the oval window which is closed by the stapes. So oval window is closed by the stapes bone. The next slide shows the ear ossicles. The ear ossicles, or the three small bones in the middle ear cavity, they are not shown in the previous slide, but now we can see it in this illustration. In this illustration, you can see the tympanic membrane, tableted ozone, the eardrum. This eardrum has the malleus attached to it from inside, and the malleus is articulating with the incus. The incus articulates with the stapes here. So in this way, you see the three small bones which are malleus, incus, and stapes. The stapes is closing the oval window. This opening called oval window, it is closed by the stapes. In the next slide, we are going to summarize everything and see the relations of the nerves to the middle ear. This is a summary of everything we have mentioned in regards to the middle ear. The middle ear or tympanic cavity, it is a box, as I mentioned, that has 6 walls, the roof, which is made by the tegmen tympani, the floor, which is related to the internal jugular vein, the anterior wall, this is the anterior wall, which is related to the internal carotid artery, and it has an opening for the auditory tube or pharyngeal-tympanic tube, and it has an opening for the course of the tensor tympani muscle. The posterior wall, it has an opening for the adductors to the mastoid and intramastoid hair cells, and it is related to the facial nerve. The medial wall, it is related to the prominence, it has a prominence or elevation made by the lateral semicircular canal, and then the facial canal is related to the medial wall also. Lastly, we have the promontory, a big prominence in the medial wall. Above the promontory, there is an oval window closed by the stapes. Below it, there is a round window closed by the secondary tympanic membrane. This box, or the middle ear cavity, it has air and the ossicles, the 3 small bones that I showed in the previous slide. This cavity is located in the petrous part of the temporal wall. The temporal bone has a very rough part, a very strong part. It's called the petrous part. So the petrous part of the temporal bone, that is the site of this middle ear. The nerves. There are several nerves seen in this slide. First, you can see the facial nerve, which is related to the medial wall, and then you have the facial nerve running in the posterior wall. Here, this is the posterior wall, and you can see the facial nerve. It gives 2 branches. One is the chorda tympani. The chorda tympani runs in relation to the lateral wall, which is not seen here, which is the eardrum. And then you see the chorda tympani start from here and then ends in the anterior wall where it goes out. The other nerve, there is a nerve supplying the stapedius muscle, which is attached to the pyramidal eminence at this point in the posterior wall. The nerve to stapedius is a branch from the facial nerve. There is a nerve coming from the floor and then running inside the middle ear cavity. This nerve is the tympanic branch of the glossopharyngeal or cranial nerve number 9. There is also the lesser pectoral nerve, which is the parasympathetic. This lesser pectoral nerve arises from the tympanic plexus. The tympanic plexus is a plexus of several nerves in the middle ear. It's made by the sympathetic branch coming from the sympathetic plexus around the internal carotid. This branch from the internal carotid plexus shares in the formation of the tympanic plexus. The tympanic plexus is made by three important nerves: the tympanic branch of the glossopharyngeal nerve, the lesser petrosal nerve, which is parasympathetic, and this sympathetic, which is branch from the internal carotid plexus. Three nerves together, they branch and make a big plexus, which is called the tympanic plexus of nerves. This tympanic plexus of nerves is supplying the linings and everything in the walls, the lining membrane covering the wall of the middle ear cavity. This concludes the part of the middle ear. In the following slide, we are going to see the details of the inner ear. In the next slide, we are going to learn about the structure of the inner ear. The inner ear is also called internal ear or labyrinth. It is located in the petrous part of the temporal bone, and it is made of two divisions: the bony labyrinth and the membranous labyrinth. The bony labyrinth, it is located in the petrous part of the temporal bone. It has three components. First, it has the semicircular canals, it has the vestibule, and the cochlea, قوقعة. The bony labyrinth is the part that you can see here in yellow color. It contains fluid called perilymph running inside the bony labyrinth. The perilymph is produced by cells of the bony canal, the bony labyrinth. So in this illustration, you can see the temporal bone. Inside it, there is a bone called the bony labyrinth. The cells of the bony labyrinth produce fluid called perilymph. The perilymph has inside it another structure called membranous labyrinth. The cells of the membranous labyrinth produce fluid called the endolymph. So again, let's repeat the bony labyrinth. The bony labyrinth is made by the semicircular canals, the vestibule, and the cochlea. The vestibule and the semicircular canals, they contain the organs that perceive or receive the impulses for balance or equilibrium. So the function of these two parts, the semicircular canals and the vestibule, they are for the detection, the reception of balance. This vestibule is located in the middle, connecting two things, connecting the cochlea, which is a receptor for hearing, with the semicircular canals, which are the receptor for balance. The membranous labyrinth. This membranous labyrinth is shown in the illustration by the bluish color, and it has continuous membrane-walled sacs. So the membranous labyrinths are sacs and ducts. They are located within the bony labyrinth, the yellowish color here. The three parts of the membranous labyrinth are the semicircular ducts, the utricle, and the saccule, and lastly the cochlear duct. So this slide shows you two things: bony labyrinths and membranous labyrinths. The bony labyrinths are the structures made of bone, as you see here, the cochlea, the vestibule, and the semicircular canals. Inside this bony labyrinth, you will see membranous labyrinths, bluish color, which are the semicircular ducts located inside the semicircular canals. The utricle and the vestibule, they are located inside the utricle, and the saccule, they are located inside the vestibule, and the semicircular duct located inside the cochlea. The cochlea, here it is. It is bony structure. It is one of the parts of the bony labyrinth. We are going to make a section in it. So here is the cochlea. We are going to make this section and see the contents, what's inside this bony labyrinth. The cochlea contains inside it the cochlear duct. Here it is. This is the cochlear duct. The cochlear duct is a part of the membranous labyrinth and it contains endolymph. It is surrounded by fluid, which is called the perilymph on top, in the scala vestibuli, and the perilymph in the bottom in the scala tympani. In this cochlear duct, you will see the spiral organ of Corti. This organ of Corti is the sensory structure for perception of the sounds, for it is organ of hearing. The sensory organ of hearing is called the organ of Corti. It is located on the basilar membrane, which is here in this side. As you see, the cochlear division of the vestibulocochlear nerve or the auditory nerve gives branches that reach to this sensory organ, which is the organ of Corti. Again, the cochlear duct is also called scala media. As you see here, it is like a wedge-shaped structure. It contains the endolymph. The sound vibrations make impulses in the oval window, and it ends creating vibrations in the perilymph, in the semicircular canals, and this vibration in the perilymph, it's affecting the cochlear duct that contains the organ of Corti, which is responsible for the detection of the sound waves. In this slide, you can see the inner ear with sectional view of the semicircular canal and the cochlea. The cochlea, you can see the section of it that I have just finished. This is the section through the cochlea. Now, if you look at the whole structure, you can see the membranous labyrinth forming a series of ducts and sacs, and the semicircular canals contain inside it the semicircular ducts. So the canal is part of the bony labyrinth, as you see it in the dark color here, and the membranous labyrinth has ducts. The ducts are located inside the canals. The part of the membranous labyrinth called the semicircular ducts, they have a little dilatation at the end of each canal. This little dilatation is called the ampulla. These ampulla join another structure which is called the utricle. This is the utricle. It's part of the membranous labyrinth. And the utricle has the sensory organ of balance, which is called Otolith's organ. The utricle is continuous with another structure which is called the saccule. The saccule is also having an otolith's organ, which is the sensory organ of balance. So both structures, the ampullae have sensory organ of balance, the utricle has sensory organ of balance, and also the saccule has the sensory organ of balance. This saccule is continuous with the cochlear duct, which is part of the membranous labyrinth. The endolymph inside this network is reabsorbed into the bloodstream through the endolymphatic duct. The endolymphatic duct is located within the vestibular aqueduct. This concludes the structure of the ear. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask me, and thank you. The auditory pathway. This pathway is concerned with the sensation of sounds, the hearing sense. The sensory receptor inner hair cells are present in the organ of Corti, which is localized on the basilar membrane in the cochlear duct of the inner ear. They transmit the hearing sensory signals to the bipolar cells of the spiral ganglion, which is the first order neuron. So the first order neuron is the bipolar cells of the spiral ganglion. This is part of the cochlear division of vestibulocochlear nerve. It will enter the medulla oblongata at the cerebello-pontine angle. So the cochlear nerve or the cochlear division of vestibulocochlear nerve enters the rostral or the higher part or the superior part of the medulla oblongata at the cerebello-pontine angle. It will stimulate the second order neuron, which is the cochlear nuclei. Cochlear nuclei are two types of nuclei, dorsal cochlear nucleus and ventral cochlear nucleus. The dorsal cochlear nucleus sends the axon to reach the contralateral side only. That means the dorsal cochlear nucleus sends the axon that crosses to the opposite side. It reaches the contralateral side only. While the ventral cochlear nucleus sends axons that reach both sides. So it is sending the axons on the right and left side. So it is bilateral. The axons of one side reach to both sides. Since it is going to both sides, the fibers that arise from the ventral cochlear nucleus decussate at a structure called the trapezoid body, as you'll see in the following slide. That trapezoid body shows the crossing of the fibers from one side to the other. Then the fibers will reach to the superior olivary nucleus bilaterally on both sides and ascend in the lateral lemniscus to reach to the inferior colliculus, which is the third order neuron. Also, this is bilateral because it started bilateral and is continuing high up bilateral to reach to the level of the inferior colliculus at the midbrain. The inferior colliculus projects via the brachium of the inferior colliculus to reach to the medial geniculate nuclei of both thalami. That is the fourth order neuron on both sides, bilateral, which radiate by the way of the sublenticular part of internal capsule. Sublenticular part of internal capsule. It contains the auditory radiation. This is called auditory radiation. That will reach to the transverse temporal gyrus of Heschel or the primary visual cortex area 41 and 42. Please note that the input from each ear reaches the auditory cortex of both cerebral hemispheres. That means it is bilateral. This slide shows you an illustration of what I have just mentioned about the auditory pathway. It starts here from the organ of Corti. The organ of Corti has inner hair cells. Here is the inner hair cells. These are the receptors. They send the signal to reach to the cochlear ganglion. The cochlear or spiral ganglion receives the sensory signal from the inner hair cells, and then it continues as the central process of the cochlear nerve to reach to the rostral medulla or upper medulla. At the level of the rostral medulla, as you see, the fibers are dividing. Some of it will reach to the ventral cochlear nucleus and other will reach to the dorsal cochlear nucleus. From the dorsal cochlear nucleus, this is the second order neuron. So again, we said the first order neuron is the cochlear or spiral ganglion. The second order neuron is the cochlear nuclei. ventral and dorsal. The dorsal cochlear nucleus sends the fibers only that cross to the opposite side only, while the ventral cochlear nucleus sends fibers that reach both sides, the same side and the opposite side. That's why I said it is bilateral. So it reaches to the superior olivary nucleus bilaterally on both sides. These fibers that are coming from the ventral cochlear nucleus, they cross at an area called the trapezoid body. The fibers decussate. What's in the right side will go to the left, and what's in the left will go to the right. So it is called the ventral acoustic stria, and it's a site of decussation. From the superior olivary nucleus, the fibers will go high up using the lateral lemniscus on both sides. Lateral lemniscus on both sides. And it will reach to the level of the inferior colliculus bilaterally on both sides. Note that the inferior colliculus of one side is connected with the inferior colliculus of the opposite side. There is fibers connecting both sides. Then from the inferior colliculus, it will reach to the medial geniculate nucleus, and the medial geniculate nucleus of the thalamus will send the axon going to the auditory cortex. And it's also bilateral because it starts from one side and it ends in both cerebral hemispheres. So again, the four order neurons that we have start by first order neuron is the cochlear or spiral ganglion. Second order neuron is the cochlear nuclei, ventral and dorsal, and their axons. The third order neuron is the inferior colliculus. The fourth order neuron is the medial geniculate nucleus of the thalamus. When it reaches to the primary auditory cortex, this is the primary auditory cortex, which is also located at the transverse temporal gyri of Heschel. It is area number 41 and 42. The fibers also cross to the opposite side from one primary auditory cortex to the other primary auditory cortex using the fibers of the corpus callosum to connect one side to the opposite side. Also, from the primary auditory cortex here, you'll see that fibers run to reach to the auditory association cortex, which is area 22. If you look at this picture of the brain, as you see, the cerebral hemisphere has been cut at the level of the lateral sulcus, and the part of the insula is exposed. The insular gyri, short and long gyri, are here, and just behind the posterior to the insular gyri, you will see the transverse temporal gyri of Heschel. So this is the primary auditory cortex. So the area 41 and 42, they are transverse temporal gyri of Heschel that run from the superior temporal gyrus deep in the depths of the lateral sulcus of the cerebral hemisphere. So you don't see it from the surface. You have to expose the depths of the insula so that you can see these transverse temporal gyri of Heschel. To summarize the auditory pathway. The auditory pathway starts from the cochlear hair cells. These are in the organ of Corti. And they send the impulse to reach to the spiral ganglion of the cochlear nerve. The spiral ganglion of the cochlear nerve sends the axon to the cochlear nucleus. So actually the cochlear nerve, it has peripheral axon and central axon. The central axon is the one that reaches to the cochlear nucleus. This area is having only ipsilateral input. So this is the first order neuron. The spiral ganglion of cochlear nerve is the first order neuron, and it is on one side only. When you reach to the level of the cochlear nuclei, which are the ventral and dorsal cochlear nuclei, what will happen? The fibers will be crossing to the opposite side, and some of them will stay in the same side, so it is bilateral input. Higher than the level of the cochlear nucleus, everything is bilateral input.
The fibers from the cochlear nucleus will reach to the superior olivary nucleus, and then from there it will reach to the inferior colliculus. That's in regards for the fibers that are coming from the ventral cochlear nucleus. The fibers coming from the dorsal cochlear nucleus will run directly in the lateral lemniscus of the opposite side to reach to the inferior colliculus. From the inferior colliculus, which is the third order neuron, the fibers will run in the brachium of the inferior colliculus to reach to the medial geniculate nucleus of the thalamus. The medial geniculate nucleus of the thalamus is the fourth order neuron, and the fibers run in the sublenticular part of the anterior capsule to reach to the primary auditory cortex, which is area 41 and 42, and from there it reaches to the auditory association cortex, area 22. So the bilateral input is everything higher than the level of the cochlear nucleus, which is the second neuron. Higher than the second neuron, everything will be bilateral. If there is a unilateral lesion to the auditory cortex or the pathway higher than the cochlear nuclei, it will cause no loss of hearing. The patient will be able to hear. Why? Because, as I said, the signal is transmitted bilaterally. So if you damage one side, the opposite side is working, so you'll still receive the signal and you will still be able to hear the sounds very well. However, it may reduce the sound intensity a little and the ability to localize the site of the sound, so to know the direction of the sound bilaterally. That means if there is reduction in the sound intensity, it will be reduced in both ears, and the ability to localize the sound coming from which side, it will be reduced on both sides, because, as I said, it is bilateral input. However, if there is a damage to the organ of Corti that contains the hair cells, or to the cochlear nerve itself, in the peripheral axon of the cochlear nerve, what will happen? That will cause ipsilateral total hearing loss. That will cause deafness or hearing loss at the same side only. This slide shows you the hearing defects, all the types of hearing defects that can occur. There are actually two types of hearing defects: conductive deafness and nerve deafness. The conductive deafness or the conduction deafness, they are caused by anything that prevent the sound waves from reaching to the organ of Corti. So the sound that runs in the external auditory canal reach to the eardrum, transmits through the ossicles, and then reach to the inner ear to the organ of Corti. Anything that blocks this pathway will causes conduction deafness or conductive deafness. The defect is in the external ear or in the middle ear. So in the external ear, in the external auditory meatus, it can have wax, and the wax will block the transmission of the sound. In the middle ear, the tympanic membrane or the eardrum could be perforated, and if it is perforated, it will not transmit the sound impulse or the sound wave very well. So it will cause deafness, and that's called conductive deafness. If there is inflammation of the middle ear cavity as otitis media, it will also cause the conductive deafness. And if there is deposition of calcium around the oval window, around the stapes here, that is a condition called otosclerosis. It occurs in the elderly, and it will cause also conductive deafness. So these are the causes of the conductive deafness. In regards to the nerve deafness, on the other hand, nerve deafness or the sensory neural deafness is caused by the disease affecting the cochlea, the cochlear nerve, or the auditory pathway. Usually, it happens due to damage or degeneration of the organ of Corti in the cochlea. But it could be due to a tumor, for example, tumor affecting the eighth cranial nerve, the cochlear nerve, like acoustic neuroma or schwannoma. It can affect the eighth cranial nerve and cause nerve deafness. In the inner ear, there are many things that cause damage to the inner ear. For example, the noises, the high noisy sounds can damage the organ corti. During the aging process in the elderly, a condition called presbycusis, it occurs due to the degeneration of the inner hair cells of the organ of corti. Ototoxicity, toxicity due to drugs or any toxins can affect the inner ear. Labyrinthitis, inflammation of the inner ear, can also affect the hearing and cause nerve deafness. Meniere's disease, this is a specific disease. We are going to learn about it at the end of the lecture. It has specific findings for it, and also a congenital anomaly affecting the inner ear, for example, absence of the organ of corti. This concludes the part related to the auditory pathway.
Thank you very much.